From the DNA Company, this is the Unpilled Podcast with your host, Kashif Khan.
This gentleman is the perfect guy you need for your biotechnology company. He's an ex-NHL player. And I said, how does that make any sense? And when we got speaking to this gentleman, I realized exactly why we needed him on the team. Brad May, well known for his May Day goal where he saved the team, made it all happen. In fact, when I got an email from him the other day, it's in his signature line, Brad May, May Day. I realized that this space of athletics and performance, there's so much going on that's gray area where, one guy can get fit, one guy has depression, one guy's an achiever. And so much needs to be unpacked in terms of why is this all happening? How do we get to these guys and optimize their performance before they hit the roadblocks and don't understand why they even got there? And for those guys that highly excel, how did they achieve and how did they get so far? And in talking with Brad about that, we got deep into some of the nuances that are challenges for players, and we're going to look at some of that today. So I invite today Brad. How's it going, man?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for having me on, Kashif. And I'll tell you what, I'm just I'm fascinated by obviously the advancements, in the medical field, but specifically with DNA. It's incredible to me that we basically go through this life blind without taking that information that we now have, revolutionary really, where there was a great saying once that you can never change the direction of the wind, but you can always adjust your sails to get to your destination. And I think that's kind of embodies the DNA company and your quest of helping people become not only better, but their best human self.
That's exactly it. And the trouble with adjusting your sails when it comes to human performance is what choices do you make? And that's what we sort of unlocked. And in talking to you, we realized there's so much opportunity for athletes because you didn't know what questions to ask. What were the choices you even needed to tackle, right? And it's by unlocking this instruction manual that we have in us that okay, here's what I got to do when it comes to diet, like nutrition, even something as simple as is golfing going to give me a heart attack or not? Literally, right? And that question wouldn't make any sense to a clinician, but we can dive deep into why that happens. In doing so, we've dealt with some NHL players recently in our clinic and experienced some really unique things. And it led me to this question about, somebody actually asked me, NHL is one of those few sports where it's predominantly white, right? And in your generation, it was almost exclusive. And somebody asked about the genetics of that. And the unique thing was, I'm going to ask you about this. Did you find that as you were playing, that there was a difference in sort of mood and behavior during the season, which was in the winter, as opposed to off season?
Interesting question. I think as a player, we were always active, obviously playing hockey in the winter, but we play multiple sports. Right. I think the today's day and age, obviously they're one sport athletes, it's really demanding. But come spring and summer, we're always out moving around. I would say and I don't even know where you're going with this question, outside of, we were indoors, obviously in Canada. It's darker, clearly. I was a happier guy in the summer. I'm really affected by, my mood is affected by the weather, the sunshine. I definitely feel it. So to answer your question, I would say I'd probably be happier and had more energy in the summertime or in the days that were longer and brighter.
Yeah, and we were looking into that and we found the same. And this is where genetically, to answer that question, it's not like a race thing where, white people are better at this and other people are better at something else, right? But the question came up a few times, even almost recreationally, when people say, oh, you do DNA, why is this going on in the NHL? And we realized that, as you said, it's an indoor sport. It's in the winter, and both of those combined, there's no vitamin D. And population-wise, ethnic population, especially equatorial, darker skin, need a lot of vitamin D in order to be happy and thrive. This is why you would find that as a kid, hey, a parent puts you into a certain sport, the darker the kid, the less they like hockey. And this is literally what's going on, that in that indoor environment, in the winter, even if it's not indoors, you're playing on a pond, it's frozen somewhere. It's still dark. It's winter. There's no vitamin D. That pleasure that you experience in the summer, that mood shift, vitamin D is responsible for 10% of your genetic processes. Like out of the 22,000 genes in your body, literally 2,000 plus require vitamin D to fire it properly. So if that's not happening because you're not getting enough, all of a sudden everything's gone out of whack. And if you're from the closer you are to the equator, the more your ancestors were dependent on that vitamin D, or sorry, I shouldn't say dependent, the more they were exposed to the vitamin D, which meant that coming out of that type of environment, they were highly dependent, didn't have enough.
Would this speak to like mental health issues?
For sure.
It's everywhere in every sphere, but certainly as a hockey player, we've had a lot of guys go down that path.
Sure. And this is exactly what I want to ask you about. And because you have the insights that people don't have. You saw everyone's watching the players perform on the ice, but in the locker room or back home, whatever, you hear the stories that we didn't get to hear. So, and this is what we're thinking as we put pieces together, especially as COVID is hitting and we're seeing people stuck at home and mood shifts and there's this sort of mental health crisis hitting. A lot of it has to do with not being outdoors. And this is where we saw that the answer to that question, why is this sport look a certain way? Well, it's because people from northern climates like Scandinavian, Northern European, Western European don't need as much vitamin D. They came from climates where they didn't get it. So they had the genetic ability to use it better, more efficiently. Right.
Wow.
And so you would excel in that environment where others couldn't, especially if it's like you're a player, you're training day after day, you're on the ice indoors or in the winter on the, so we unlock this. We said, it's not like a direct genetic, hey, I'm good at this because of who I am, but you look at other sports. Why is it, basketball is played outdoors, soccer, football, whatever you want to call it, played outdoors predominantly. And you look at the sort of diaspora of who's on the field, looks very different. There's other things going on there that makes it that way, but we did see for sure that this was when you try and find that what's happening in my DNA that's causing this. There is something going on. It's the inability to sort of cope with even the mental pressure. So as you're saying, you found that there was definitely like a mood and behavior issue in terms of players, like, locker room.
Well, there's no doubt. I was traded from, I started my career in Buffalo, but I was traded to Vancouver. And so in British Columbia, I think it's the most beautiful city in North America. However, the rain sets in, in the wintertime, it's pretty dark and dull and gray. And I know one of our coaches actually was speaking, basically daily about trying to get the team to buy sunbeds and everything else, or for us to have different lighting within our locker room because we're in the dark so much, not to mention flying a lot more than other teams. And it's Mike Johnson was his name, but he was adamant that if we actually made that change, this is 15, 20 years ago, we'd become a better hockey team. Now, I'm not sure where other teams are like that, but the Canadian teams, I can tell you one thing, playing hockey in a hockey crazed market was fantastic, right? Vancouver, Buffalo. I played in Toronto and Detroit, but it was really fun to be a hockey player in Phoenix. It was a very good time playing hockey in Anaheim, Southern California, where you'd literally step out of the arena after putting in your work for, whatever time it took every day, practice in the morning, leave in the afternoon. You'd step out and it was sunshine. You're wearing flip-flops, and it was a different feeling. And I'll tell you what, your body, of course, broken bones, they heal and they break, but you felt a lot more energy, and I seem to be happier being south.
Yeah, it makes sense. And this is where, people would ask, what about other sports? Like, basketball is also played indoors. Other sports are also played in, but it's not that's when you get to the final. Like, I'm in the NBA, right? To get there, where do the best players come from? They're not coming from Winnipeg, right? They're coming from the southern, North America. They're coming from California. They're living and growing the game outdoors, right? They're playing on the court, and that's where they learn. Eventually, they get better and they get drafted or they get picked up and go to some college team. And then, of course, this is where we actually recently worked with a team in, I think it was Orlando, where they were saying one of the issues that the NBA is facing is this shift once the players become professionals to this mental strain. And it's not about the game. It's more about social pressures. My family wants tickets. My mom needs a new car. My friends keep texting me saying, hey, you're in town, we need to go party. And they need to focus on their physique and their game. And again, it goes back to environmental shift. They're no longer playing outdoors, right? They're no longer exposed to what they naturally needed. They're constantly indoors, in fact, right? Whether they're training, playing, working, there's that lifestyle shift, right? Which causes this mental or mood and behavior shift, which often gets chalked up as a mental health issue when it's just a vitamin D issue. And in fact, we have a player that we are working with here in Toronto who kept getting fractures, right? An NHL player who you probably know. And his doctors, you would have the best doctors you would think in sports medicine, dealing with an NHL team, said, well, your vitamin D levels are fine. So it doesn't make sense. It's not a medical issue. You're just playing too hard. You're hitting the boards too hard. So we looked at his genetics, and this is what we found. When the process of vitamin D metabolization, yes, you need to take vitamin D from the sun or from food and put it into the blood. That's what you do. And the belief is that you have enough now. There's 2 more steps to the process. If you look at it genetically, you got to take it from the blood and transport it to the cell. That's an entirely separate gene that does that. And some people, again, if you came from a sunny climate where you had too much exposure to vitamin D, which is toxic, by the way, if you overdose, it's actually a hormone. It's not even a vitamin. Some people have the slow version of that. So it's like having, a taxi with 2 seats as opposed to 4 or 5. Then your cell actually has to bind the vitamin D. That's another entire separate genetic process. And some people have the best binder or the weakest binder. So you can have plenty of vitamin D in your blood like this player did, but keep getting fractures and mood and behavior issues because he didn't transport it to the cell and he didn't bind it when it got there. So the vitamin D pill that he was taking, that 1,000 IU Health Canada recommended daily dose, he was peeing out 800 of it by the time, anything happened with it. So simple fix, we put him on 5 doses a day, right? And said that when you take in vitamin D, you pee out 80%. So let's just take it 5 times to get you up to normal. Okay. That simple fix. The season after, no fractures.
It's unreal. So an athlete, and that's why we're here. An athlete, a high achiever, someone who's pushing their body like in the athletic sphere, knowing where their DNA is. Like, can this change your diet? Everything else that obviously we just heard about vitamin D, but what else? Like, as an athlete,
sure. Like,
my quest to be the best that I can be. How do you help me?
So you talk about the human body and optimization. There's I believe 6 big buckets, right? There's healthcare. There's certain things that you're reacting to that are pain points: fibromyalgia, menopause, prostate cancer. Those are health concerns you need to really deal with acutely. Human optimization is, how do I make the right choices for me so I don't ever get to those problems and I'm at the optimal version of myself? And we see that in 6 buckets. Sleep. If you're not sleeping properly, your body's not repairing and not recovering. Used to be the belief that, sleeping is weak, right? You need to be able to sleep 2 hours a day and perform. We've learned now that that's the flip opposite of the truth. It's one of the most important things you need to do during the day. But some people can't fall asleep. Some people can't stay asleep. Some people don't get high quality sleep. All of that is genetically driven. Immunity and detox, clearing toxins, ability to repair, ability to deal with viral infections, being a player on the road and being hit with all these different populations and being exposed to things. So that whole level of being immune and healthy from the inside. Diet and nutrition, like you just said. What is the right diet for me? Paleo, keto, low carb, high carb, carnivore diet. All of these things work for certain people. It's this trial and error. You got to go through a bunch of things before you figure out what makes me feel good and what actually makes me burn that fat or put on the muscle. Why not just understand what your instruction manual is already saying anyway, right? So that's all genetically predetermined. Fitness and hormones, your body's development, how you deal with muscle development. And there's some guys that have that ripped, striated muscle where you can see every fiber. And there's some guys that are big and strong and thick, but they can never show the fibers. That's all genetically predetermined. And then cardiovascular, which again is more of a health concern, but there's so much in terms of human optimization that comes out of the vasculature of the body. What version of the arteries do you have? How is blood flowing? Nitric oxide, and how it helps with everything going on, right? So, and the last thing is mood and behavior, which is probably the biggest thing, because all of these other things are based on perception. So the way your brain is wired, how you think determines how you're going to deal with all this other stuff, right? Even something as simple as food. Am I an addict? Am I a binger? Do I graze every time I walk by the pantry and just throw something in and I don't even know I'm doing it? Do I lean on food as a coping mechanism? All genetically predetermined. So to go through this process and to understand these 6 buckets about yourself, it's like you 5.0, right?
Wow.
And this is what we've done with players. And this is where, in terms of the issues we've seen, recovery is a huge thing. And I'm sure you've seen issues where injury can make or break careers.
Oh, for sure. And especially at the different times of their career as well. But yeah, some guys, I've seen guys that were great players that didn't have the ability to recover. And I saw other guys that, you thought they were down and out, and, 6 weeks later, whatever the timeline would be, you would never know they were injured before, whether that's a concussion, whether that was, shoulder, knee, something internal, especially the tissue. Like I was a guy when I played hockey, I didn't bruise. Like I would actually get slashed or hit, and it would hurt like the worst pain. But tomorrow I show up and it would be sore, but there would be no discoloring. Where other guys would get bumped and they'd have these bruises from their hip to their knee and down their side. So that's obviously has something to do with genetics. I would imagine. For me, I played 19 years, Kashif, in the hockey league. I was injured a bunch, but had the ability to recover. Very seldom, again, I very seldom got the flu. I don't think I've had the flu in 10 years. And I know we're talking about this within COVID, which we've all been on the sidelines, for a year. But yeah, why?
So recovery is huge. I mean, in terms of, and we've dealt with this, something as sort of acute as fractures, like we just talked about, or, the bruising, or the, the tendon issue, or the guy that's limping for a month, everybody's body deals with those things differently. First of all, the thing that we skip over and we don't look at is not the injury itself, but the inflammation that's caused, right? So your inflammation is a natural response, but how well do we deal with the anti-inflammatory response? The injury may be healed, but you're still inflamed. And for you, that no bruising, that like I'm back on the ice tomorrow. And this is why, you have that vitality, and you regardless of whether you're playing or not anymore, you look like you're ready to jump on the ice right now, right? And
outside of a few pounds, Kashif, we're gonna tweak our diet here coming up. Right? Outside of that, no, I feel unreal. Like I'm almost 50 years old, and I have zero pains. And
and there's other guys that that battle that they went through is just, they feel every pain point, right? It sticks with them. And if we start with concussion, like you mentioned, genetically predetermined, there's one gene, literally one gene, that deals with neuroplasticity, that repair, right? So the BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, that's the gene that determines how well do I deal with concussion, my ability to avoid it or get it, and how quickly do I recover, right? And there's some guys that over and over again concuss. There's some guys that they can use their head as a tool and open a coconut with it and no issue, right? And it's this one gene that determines how well you deal with neuroplasticity, but it also deals with other things. It's how well do I sleep? Do I manage my circadian rhythms well? And do I even know it's daytime or nighttime, meaning internally? How well do I deal with sort of that neurotic response, that drama queen? You'll find the guys that were often getting concussions, also, you'd have to walk around eggshells on them because they were very sensitive, or they get that emotional response out of them. It's the same biochemistry that's leading to the two things. But in terms of general recovery, your anti-inflammatory response, there's a whole slew of genes that make up what's called your methylation system, essentially your anti-inflammatory system. And between these 7 or 8 genes, depending on what versions you have, you could be Superman like you and recover from everything and feel great and not even remember that you used to be on the ice. And you could be like, it's a life sentence, my body just, we have a patient we dealt with as an example. This lady was retired. She was in her 70s, I believe. And she got onto one of our formulas through her clinic, not for any particular purpose, just because she was into sort of anti-aging, and her clinician told her, this is a great product, based on your DNA, we're going to get you everything you need. Right. So she went on it. She was in a car accident and her arm was numb from her fingertip to her elbow on one side. So had been going through, the typical medical processes and dealing with all that. And a couple weeks into the formula, her fingertips, she woke up in the middle of the night with pain. 6 weeks into the formula, she had complete mobility of her arm. This was after 1 year of literally being told that it's an injury and there's nerve damage, you're done. Like that, you're just going to live with it, right? It took 6 weeks. What was the problem? The same thing that a lot of athletes face when it comes to that sort of, this is my, stamp of my years of playing. It's not going away. That pain that I always feel, it's that anti-inflammatory response. So she was suffering from neural inflammation. Literally, the neurology was suffocating because she was just constant. She was inflamed. It just wasn't going away. So in building her sort of custom formula of what she needed nutraceutically, we were dealing with the inflammation, not knowing that this particular issue existed, but it was, from head to toe, it dealt with everything. And all of a sudden she got feeling of her hand. And there's so many players that could be looking at, injury differently. And even if you're in the process of playing, how quickly do I get back on the ice?
See, a big thing for me, a lot of players obviously have this chronic pain or chronic, groin pulls or whatever, different parts of your body, whatever's been injured. What happens is the general manager and the guys and the brain trust, the management team above, once they have a label on a player, it's awfully difficult to change it, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you have a history of certain injuries or certain rhythm of playing so many games and being injured. You don't sign another contract.
Yeah.
Or you sign a contract for half as much or whatever. I mean, this is like every day that's missed for an athlete. And I'm talking the big sports, because not all sports are their athletes are paid as well as they should be. But as a hockey player, for instance, you find out what your DNA is. You get the fast track, or certainly the ability to adjust and do the right things, as you said, lifestyle, decision making. All of a sudden you could actually get rid of a lot of the stigmas that have been placed on players, because of their past. And I'd say our sport has a difficult time releasing or getting rid of labels that, on a player that was 18 years old and had an issue when they're 25 years old and their life is completely different. They're still labeled with whatever that player did when they were 18, or how they lived or how they felt or their injuries. So I think the DNA company, like across the board for players, not only for the players, but for the teams, to understand that, where that guy can be or that gal can be, and more importantly, where they can, get to in their journey to be the best they can be, right?
That's awesome. I mean, you have insights that others don't have, because you saw the behind the scenes, you lived it. In doing that, that there's something that you would have experienced that some of us think about, but that sort of team dynamic, and that we assume that everybody's friendly and happy and that there's this great brotherhood going on. But I would imagine you have stories about what's actually going on. And I would ask, and this is something where, yes, there's answers that can be applied. Tell us, what did you experience? What was going on? And was it smooth and brotherly, or was there a lot of roughness?
Well, I guess many different ways I could answer that question. As a teammate, I do think, and I love the sport of hockey, love my teammates. I think it's one of the greatest parts of our sport. But like looking at it in general, when you get to that level to become a professional, really at the end of the day, and I'm just going to be frank, as a player, I'm worrying about me.
Right.
I don't ever want the label, hey, that guy's a selfish player. You want to do things for your teammates and your team and whatever. However, if your teammate gets hurt and he's a left winger and I'm a left winger, that means that I actually now have the ability, possibly, if I'm ready, to move up, play more, possibly play more. I have more success. I have more success. I make more money. And do I really care that my friend got injured?
Right.
No. To be truthful, if we care about each other 100%, but really at the end of the day, feast or famine, we don't care.
So the dynamic is you got the team trying to build this team, but you got the players all looking out for themselves.
Well, and that's the balance. Understanding that everybody's looking out for themselves and should, but it's the idea that, for instance, playing time. This is not, but playing time. You complain to your teammate. Geez, I can't believe it. The coach isn't playing me. I deserve X amount more minutes. Whatever. I should be playing more. You see how I played yesterday. Whatever. And your buddy's sitting there, and he's like, "Yeah, you know what? You should play more. You deserve it because you're friends. You're talking to one another." But really, when he goes to sleep that night, he's like, "Listen, Brad's not playing. That means I'm playing more, and I don't give a a flying whatever if Brad's playing 8 minutes or 10 or 12 minutes. Bottom line is, I just want to play my 15, 20 minutes a night." So you complain to the wrong people. You're best friends with your teammates, but to be honest with you, you're competing with one another the whole time. And it's all about ice time, opportunity. Opportunity breeds success. When you're successful, you make more money. And at the end of the day, outside of the joy and love of playing, when you're actually at that level, it's about making money and setting your family up going forward.
And this makes sense because, to get to the NHL, how many kids in North America are trying to do this, which means you have to be achievement oriented. You have to be wired for success. So to get to that cream of the crop, like I've got to get drafted into a team, it's not just about the skill, it's the drive. And where does that drive come from? And that cunning sort of the dealing with the politics of how do I even get ice time? So there's a certain cognitive wiring. And this is why I asked, because you would expect that when you have a sort of an entire community of people that are elite, how do they get from the millions of kids that want to do this to the very few? There's less than 20 people on our team, whatever that number is. There's very specific genetic wiring in terms of achievement orientation. A lot of it, and this is why you also see the flip opposite. You see the depression and you see the mood swings. Dopamine is what determines reward and pleasure. Two different things. And to experience reward, you got to bind, you release it during that time and you bind it and you feel it. And then, wow, I achieved. You get that feeling, that success. You'll often find that people that are entrepreneurial or high achievers or have that drive don't really experience reward that well. And that's why they are constantly seeking more, right? So that player that's on the ice that is enjoying the game and driving so much pleasure out of it, that doesn't need that sort of hit of like, I need to achieve something, may never achieve something. On the flip opposite is true. And this is why you'll see a lot of athletes, when it comes to the game's over, I'm retired, they'll either get into business or the flip opposite, they may end up going downhill into depression, right? Into addiction, substance abuse, because the flip opposite of achievement is depression, right? You have three outcomes. You're either depressed because you're never feeling reward or pleasure. You're addicted because you're feeding the pleasure, third party. You're finding something to feed that pleasure, or you achieve because you're feeding reward. You can go down one of two paths: pleasure, reward. And I figured that's why I asked you, because you would think that when you have a community of high achievers, elite people that made it to the top, that they're going to be people that are wired for achievement. It's not easy to do this. And then you would have that. It doesn't end at I got into the NHL. It ends at I want to be the best in the NHL. I want to be the best on my team and then the best in the league. And, and this is where you would get that ultra competitiveness, because whatever I did yesterday just isn't good enough anymore. I need more reward, more reward, more reward. Right? It's
amazing. When you say that, I played with a number of Hall of Famers and a lot of great players. I think we use the word great too often, to be honest. When we're, because the great should be reserved for the great one. That's Wayne Gretzky. Beyond that, we're all good players and lesser than. But just playing with some Hall of Famers, they were stoic. It would be the one word I'd use. Or a player like Joe Sakic, where you're right in the moment where tensions are high or the stress levels there. And he was cool as a cucumber,
Yeah.
However, inside you wanted him on the ice because he was the fiercest competitor you had on your team, right? I would say the same thing for Pat LaFontaine and Chris Pronger and Scott Niedermayer. Scott Niedermayer probably being the number one, the most quiet, stoic player, but just a fierce competitor. But he lived a different life than the rest of us. There's no doubt about it. And that's maybe not above and beyond his talent. Obviously, he was wired right.
Yeah, it's interesting as we get into this. We're going to start, Brad, through yourself. We're going to start looking and helping more players, and we'll start to see that trend. And maybe we'll come back one day and report on that. But I'm pretty sure we're going to land somewhere along the lines of what we're saying.
Amazing.
And if they were up to you, and you had this tool, what are the things that you would want to know and learn? Like, you could go back and work with a team. What are the things that you would say, hey, this is the thing we should be working on?
Well, I know there's a lot of when you're in the draft, as a young kid, you're 18, again, you're growing. Maybe you made a mistake at 17, maybe you made a mistake at 16, and all of a sudden you're labeled. You go into the draft and quite honestly, scouts, the good ones, really dive deep and talk to moms and dads, but also go to, guidance teachers and figure out, dig deep into the past. But for these players, if you actually knew and you could actually get this test and understand who you are, number one, diet and nutrition, I think is something that 99% of us really, if we actually had the discipline, we want to be more fit, stronger, faster, whatever, as athletes. But I think that's like across the board for everyone, I would imagine, if we're committed to it.
Right.
Beyond that, the injuries, how to recover, the inflammation, the brain stuff. Obviously, it's a physical sport that hockey is, but all these sports, they have their own, basket of issues or potential problems. If I could know, like that saying again, you can't change the wind, but you can adjust your sails. If I know that my DNA is mine, but I actually through the advancements that you could actually tell me that, hey, if you do A, B, and C, you can become the better version of yourself. And with that, not go through life with blinders, that you actually can open up your vision, the sphere, that you're looking through, the lens that you see the world. Not only for the player, for the teams, but then think about the guy sitting back home having a beer on a Saturday night or a Sunday afternoon watching this sport, and he's able to be treated to something so much greater. I'm thinking down the line. I'm talking the athletes. If everybody moved and en masse and became better and stronger, hey, listen, this is good for everyone, right? But as a young player, I always was looking for what's the next opportunity or the chance for me to become better. Tony Robbins, mental coaching, Dennis Waitley, reading books, all that stuff. But and it really helped me. But this is a piece that I was never exposed to, and I'm lucky that I played, or fortunate that I played, almost 2 decades. But I think if I had this information when I was 18 years old, I would have taken it and ran with it. Would have made me better. And I don't know where we would have ended up, but it would have been better than where I'm sitting now, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine how to be better than Brad May, but maybe there's something beyond Brad May here.
I had one good moment, Mayday. No, it was. But with that being said, I don't want to. I never want to live in the woulda, coulda, shouldas,
Right?
Because we're in the present and we have to look forward. But I don't want to make mistakes, all for the reason to make mistakes and delay that success. Right? Learn from somebody else's mistake. Don't do what they just did, and you're getting to your destination quicker. So a man with a plan has a chance, Kashif.
Yeah, and this is where what you've been saying. It'd be interesting. We actually ran your test. We're gonna get those results soon. It'd be interesting to come back and talk to you about that and all of the things that we've been looking at today. To dive in and see how much of it is, how much of it is in your genetic code, right? And we can then really speak to the nuances of what you experience. It'd be cool to do that. But, as we work with you to work with athletes and, really, we believe that we can change the game, to talk about a cliche, but that's what we're going to do. Because, like you said, taking the guesswork out. Right now, what am I doing? Like, coaches, trainers, doctors are telling me this is what generally works. Try this, right? Maybe it's going to work for you. Sometimes it doesn't, and then you got to try something else. So that trial and error is expensive when you're dealing with an athlete, right? It's also, in terms of, it could change careers, because if you go down the right path or the wrong path in terms of options, where are you going to end up? One bad game, two bad games, five bad games, all of a sudden shifts what people think about you. And the opposite is true. If you're performing well, like we said, we had a player who at the tail end of a season was off the ice because he had fractures. And the start of the next season, he was having the best season he's ever had, and all of a sudden he's a star. So, one thing I'll tell you about is we have a really interesting story. We have a gentleman here in Toronto that came to us through an executive healthcare clinic. He's an NHLer, but he went the medical route because he said that, whoever I'm dealing with at the team level can't figure this out. I need a doctor, quote unquote. So he just couldn't get ripped muscle. He didn't have the strength. He was a skillful player, amazing on the ice, right? Brilliant in the mind. His concern was body. Like, I just don't have the muscle and I can't put it on. He was what you would call wiry, right? So he essentially, what he learned was that his testosterone levels were low. And he said, here's what it is. The doctors told me, you don't have testosterone. How are you going to put on muscle without it? So they gave him, and you may have seen this, and this is more and more common now. They gave him what's called an androgel pack, literally androgen, testosterone. You put it on your stomach. It's a gel pack, and your skin absorbs it. And the thinking is, I don't have enough testosterone. Give me testosterone. And now I have more. I will have more muscle. Logically, it makes sense. And medically, again, when you're sort of masking a symptom, that sounds like the right symptom to mask, right? So what happens is he goes back to his doctor. He said, I don't feel right. I have pain in my chest. My libido's gone, but my hair looks amazing. And, they give him more. They said, well, you're so low, you need more. And a couple weeks more, it's just even worse. And what happens I think it was 3-4 weeks into it, gynomastia. He literally was growing man boobs, right? He went from, I don't have enough testosterone, I don't have enough muscle, so I need a bra.
I got a few friends like that.
Yeah. And I can think of one who told me the same, the guy that actually connected us. So
that's tough.
Yeah. So what happened was, this is where he got to us, right? And I say this because, just to your point of how personalization is so important and how to make the right choices for yourself. And if you knew in the beginning and you made the right choices, how much pain and wasted time and time off the ice and performance could have been saved. What we found was, yes, genetically, he did not have enough free-flowing testosterone. And it wasn't because he didn't have enough testosterone. It's because whether you're a man or a woman, you produce progesterone, you convert it to testosterone, and you convert that to estrogen. Women do that monthly, men do it daily. That's the female monthly cycle. We have a daily cycle. He, in his process, typically a man would have a lot of free-flowing testosterone, and clear it as testosterone, and then convert some into estrogen and clear that also. His gene that converted the testosterone into estrogen was super fast. So all of his testosterone, it's not that he didn't have enough testosterone, he was just converting it all into estrogen, right? So this is why he was big, thick, strong, right? And that beautiful head of hair, right? So it was very easy for him to gain mass and squat, 600 pounds, whatever he needed to do. That wasn't the problem. He just couldn't get ripped, right? Sorry. This was the wiry guy we're talking about. I'm going back to the other guy. Yeah. So his problem was he was clearing it all, right? So he couldn't get the big, he couldn't get the ripped, but he was able to get strength. Sorry, I missed that part.
Yes.
So what was happening was, in his, normal day-to-day, he was converting to estrogen, but give him that androgen pack, and he was just converting all that testosterone into estrogen. All of it. Right? Because that's what genetically he was wired to do.
Right.
So now all of a sudden he was growing man boobs. So again, if he had these insights earlier on, all that needed to happen was blocking that conversion of testosterone to estrogen, which simple supplements can do. Very healthy, natural food products, right? There's foods that do this. And that's what happened. And within weeks, it was reversed. All of a sudden, he had what he needed in terms of strength performance. So to your point, that personalization, when your body and your performance is your career, the potential in you could veer. The path you could go on could be so different if you make the wrong or right choices. And that's the difference between being on the bench or being the star. How important is it to understand?
The window of opportunity is so minute for most players, most athletes. If you're an Olympic athlete, you've got a cycle of 4 years. If you don't hit it at the right time where you actually win your national championship or whatever it's going to be, to actually be on that team. So it's not even every 4-year cycle. These players, these athletes have to be ready to go for that moment, right?
Right.
These long professional seasons are a little different, but at the end of the day, if you miss 4 months or 8 months or a year of doing the wrong thing, you're now a 22-year-old who's now 23, and there's 5 draft classes behind you that are pushing you and trying to take your job. All of a sudden, if you do it 2 years in a row, you're probably screwed going forward. So
yeah, you're right.
For the athletics, even for the or the weekend warrior who's wanting to run a marathon, all that, and I bet you this is for everyone to understand who they are, to not waste their time.
Exactly. I mean, we've been talking about a particular, community, but really, all that happened is, until a few years ago, it was just cost prohibitive, unless you were a celebrity or an executive or pro athlete where your body was your career and the funds were there to pay for it. People were paying $50,000 for this information a few years ago. Right now it's a few hundred. So now it's available to everybody for the, a fraction of your iPhone cost. You could find out and decode your human instruction manual. So it just wasn't possible a few years ago, but now it is. And this is where, through the advocacy of people like yourself, we will get this information out to everybody. And this is, Brad, it was awesome having you with us here today. I would really like to see us do this again when we have your results in hand. It'd be awesome to go through them and share with the audience, as long as there's nothing that we need to hide. Who knows what we're going to cover, You
know what? I can tell you, I probably need an estrogen blocker. I don't want these man boobs are coming on quick. I don't want them. So beyond that, no. You know what? I've always been a very curious guy, restless in a sense that I just want to live this life right, feel great, which I do. But I want to pass on all my experience and relationships, if you will, to this movement, to actually bring on some of my buddies and people that would be very interesting to hear from and talk to, but help the next generation. At some point in time, your life changes. I'm in halftime right now, and I'm transitioning into becoming a mentor. That's what I've been doing for the last little bit, but I just want to help others. Awesome. And along with that, be selfish and take care of what's important, in my own little family. But why sit on this information if we have the ability to not only improve, but improve the lives of everyone around you, the ones that are eager or they're on the quest of becoming better, right? You can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, right? So, but if you give the information and we put it out properly, in a very simple formula for somebody to actually do this, I don't see why anybody wouldn't do this. Right. There's we're not here. There's no dress rehearsal in life.
Yeah, exactly. You got one shot.
You got one shot.
And I believe your wife got tested as well, right?
She did, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so let's. It'll be interesting. I mean, we're a few weeks out, but let's talk about that. We'll be, we'll have you back if you're available, and maybe we'll talk to your wife as well, because it's interesting also to see that dynamic of how couples work together, and there's so much more we could be exploring, and we love talking to you. So, Brad, thank you for being here with us today, and your insights are phenomenal. Your life and experience and the ability to take us backdoor in the NHL and understand what's going on there. Really, it was a pleasure. And I hope we help some people that are listening understand, what's going on. And thank you again, Brad, for being with us.
From the DNA Company, this has been the Unpilled Podcast with your host, Kashif Khan. Thanks for listening.